Hey, Fight Center here. Wanted to share with you, before I skip town for about a week, some new blank firing models by a company called Retay out of Turkey, which is where we're getting a lot of our blank guns these days. Now, I haven't, in full disclosure, I haven't test fired these yet, but let me show you. What I like about these, they actually mimic real models, which is, you know, some of the other companies, they say they do, they don't really. Now, this is not necessarily on a line with Umarex that actually gets the trademarks. So it's not quite on a par with those. For a while there, we had these Bruni Gap models. Western Stage Props used to carry these. Now, I believe Glock shut these down. They've become nigh impossible to find, but these were available once upon a time in 8mm top vent or 9mm front vent. I have some of each in my inventory. They are available in the compact or full size. Now, these are the older style Glock 17, so there's no tactical rail. But you know, they did a decent job. They sort of have that little inset trigger safety. It's not bad. It's not bad. Reliability wise, a little hard to say because at this point I was never able to get new ones. All I've been able to get is used. And as we all know, blank guns do wear out. So for me, those have been kind of, you know, par for the course. They're not bad. They work. They jam. That's the way it goes. Now, we've had a couple of additions to that. So then, what happened not too long afterwards is a company called Zoraki hit the market. And there's still a number of Zaraki models available. But this one in particular, the 917, got shut down by Glock. There were some really ugly lawsuits, even though some of the models of these that were available had not a Glock printed on the side along with the rest of this text. They tried their best. Maxell was the one importing these. They got shut down. Glock totally blocked these out. But these were obviously meant to look like the later generation Glock 17s. They've got the tactical rail. They're hammerless. I have no idea if it's an actual striker fire or not. But, you know, again, we don't really care what it is on the inside as long as it works and it looks like what it's supposed to look like for our purposes. So these are not bad. You know, these were available in front vent, 9mm. Now, this is a relatively recent find. These have been nigh impossible to find since Glock shut them down. So hopefully there will be a part 2 to this later that will include some test firing. But this is the Zoraki, side by side with the Bruni. Now, in terms of build quality, I have to say the Zoraki feels a little bit nicer, just a little bit more crisp. The Bruni's, it tends to be, everything's a little bit soft and rounded. That's not just the aesthetics, but also the feel of things. It's just a little bit mushier. But I've been working with these long enough to know that how it feels is not necessarily the same as how reliable it will be, so we'll see. Now, the new kid on the block, and I'll be very curious to see if Glock shuts them down as quickly as they did the Zorakis, is this Retay 17. Obviously, same general idea. Hold it up against the Zoraki. We've got a slight size difference. It's a slightly smaller frame. A little bit of this rounding in the back that the Zoraki doesn't have. This same kind of orange extended barrel, which we've been seeing on a lot of the front vent models available in the US recently, as sort of their workaround to make sure that the ATF will approve it. But otherwise, very similar. It only has one notch instead of two on the rail. Slight differences in aesthetics, but really not that different, not that bad. And one thing I will also say that I appreciate, just kind of the little things. The Zaraki, as most of our blank guns do, just kind of comes in this standard case here. These cheap little cases. But the Retays, most of the models at least that they come out with, and actually it looks like a real gun when it comes in the case. I mean, you got a bag and you got a little flare adapter, but It's actually a fitted foam case with actual hinge latches instead of just the plastic that's going to bend and break fairly easily. So right away, your first impression of it is much nicer. Comes with a little bit of oil, which I have to say is pretty good because these things are pretty darn stiff when you first get them. Magazine has a colored follower, which is kind of interesting to see. But the molding is pretty darn good on the polymer frame. Everything feels pretty good. It's very tight slide release here, so this is a little bit harder to manipulate. Some of that will probably break in with time, possibly with use of that oil. There is a flare adapter it comes with. Some of these it doesn't fit very well because of the orange paint. Some of them it does. Obviously, if you're using these for theater and film purposes, you can get a waiver from the Commerce Department, at which point you can either paint over this or cut it off or whatever you need to do. But I, for one, am very excited to see some more front venting Glock replicas on the theatrical market now. A couple of little beefs I have with this. The supposed ergonomic ridges here, they really don't fit unless you have a really small hand. There's no way my finger is going to be the size of that little notch there. So it's a little bit downsized, it seems, but it's not bad. You know, as with a lot of blank guns, the attention to detail isn't really there on the sights. And the Retays have this interesting kind of cutout here. It's not exactly, I mean, I wondered at first if it was a loaded chamber indicator, like you have on some real firearms in 9mm PAK. I'm going to put in a already fired off round here just to show you. But it doesn't seem to be that. I'm honestly not sure what purpose, if any, that serves. But there's a round in the chamber and there's no visible difference there. So I'm really not sure what that little hole in the back's about. But otherwise, looks and feels pretty good. And I have to say, I'm really curious to see how reliable it is in firing. I have yet to actually get a chance to fire these off. You can feel, it really does feel like it's just not broken in yet. It's a little stiff. The release is a little clunky, but I have a feeling with time that'll break in, and I'm fine with that if it does prove to be reliable. But this is really not the only model they have. This is a new company to hit the market in the States, and I'm really curious to see how it works. Mostly, I got these from Sharp Import. I also talked to Maxell, and they actually said they were not planning on carrying these because they got some samples and didn't like them. They found them not up to their quality control. So I'm really curious to see how that pans out. That may have just been their way of saying, oh, don't buy from someone else. I don't know. We'll find out. Other things that are helpful to know for those of us in the theatrical market. Does it fit in a standard Kydex holster meant for the actual firearm? So most of my gas blowbacks will fit in these just fine, which is good. This is the Bruni Gap version. It's a little bit tight, but it'll fit in a paddle holster. May or may not hold down. If you've got a good enough belt, you're probably fine. This is the Zoraki. Again, very tight fit, but probably doable. You could cheat it. This is the Retay G17. And yeah, that's not going in. So that is one downside I have to say about these. If you can find an adjustable Kydex holster where you have the little set screw, it's entirely possible that if I could loosen this up, it would fit a bit. But right now, it looks like there's a little too much height to this area here. So the tack rail is hitting the bottom. Thickness doesn't seem that different. So, you know, if you have a leather holster, you know, it might fit, it might distort it a little bit. But in terms of how useful is it really, will it work with standard accessories, that's something that to me is worth knowing. So let's move on now and look at another one of these nice Retay models. Again, nice case. This one is modeled off, fairly obviously, a Springfield XD, which is exciting to me because that's not something we've seen a blank version of before. Now, it doesn't have the grip safety in the rear that the XD has, but the whole like XR, this is the Retay XR, very obviously a ripoff of the XD, Logo is very similar the way it's modeled in. All of these are available in a variety of finishes: nickel, chrome, black. There might be another, I forget. So very similar. And once again, you can see they've got this little cutout in the back that I'm not sure exactly what that's for. Sights are a little nicer on this one, just in terms of how they're actually modeled. Let's see if I can get that to focus for me. Maybe. Anyway, you get the idea. Controls should be fairly familiar to anybody familiar with an XD. This one has 3 slots on the tack rail up front. Grip size is pretty nice for me for this one. I don't happen to have an XD handy here to compare this one to, or a holster for one, so I can't make any claims to how well it'll fit that. But same general setup. And actually, I haven't tested this yet. Out of curiosity, let's see if the magazines are swappable. Yeah, so it looks like the magazine itself is swappable, but the base plate is a different shape. So in a pinch, if you had to use the Glock style magazine in this, you could. It would probably still feed fine, it looks like, from how things line up, but it's going to feel a little funny on the bottom because they're using a different base plate. There you go. That one sticks out. That one's flush. So if you want to be able to do a magazine change on camera or on stage, it might be worth picking up an extra magazine for this. Again, as with the other, this feels a little rough. Might need some of that oil. Trigger release, nice and crisp on this one, but it still feels like it could use a little breaking in, and I'm curious to see how reliable it is. Okay, next up in another of these nice cases, we have a Retay PT24. This one looks to me like some of the newer Walthers. I'm not sure how exact a match that is. Very similar to the XR in a lot of ways, but you know, slightly different setup. We got 2 slots instead of 3. Very different grip style. That's the kind of thing where if it's in a holster, it's going to show a lot, but you know, once your actor starts hanging onto it, you're not going to see any of that anyway. Otherwise, same basic setup. You've got some little cutouts there for the sights, which is nice. That'd be easy enough to fill in with a little bit of paint. I'll probably try and do that sometime later. Once again, trying to imitate a striker fire. It's got that little cutout. Standard controls, red follower. A little less stiff than the others. Fairly nice trigger release there. I like the ergonomics on this one. Fits my hand a little bit better. But same basic setup. This one also, one unique thing about this, it does come with a lock, kind of like the Umar XP22s did. Modeled after the Walther in that case also. But there's a key that comes with it as well. So you do also have the option of using the built-in lock with these if you want to. Now this one's a little interesting. This is another Retay, and yet this one comes in our more traditional blank gun crappy little case. Not sure why. This one, now we've seen some blank guns from, I think, Voltran that are meant to look like a SIG. This is the first one that actually really kind of does to me, though. By way of comparison, where'd it go? Here we go. So by way of comparison, here is a molded rubber holster making model, training model. I don't personally own a SIG, but this, as far as I know, is true to size and proportion. This is the Retay Baron. As you can see, it's a little bit smaller. I think SIG's available in a couple different slide lengths, so I'm not too worried about that. Otherwise, very distinctive SIG controls, right? Similar stippling on the grip, and it's got a decent feel to it. Once again, feels a little dry, feels like it needs a little breaking in, but not bad. This one, black follower, not sure why they changed some of these things. Slide release is a little bit looser. We got an exposed hammer this time, so there isn't that funky cutout. As with most SIGs, we have a decocker now, which is kind of an interesting option. Those of you who are teaching workshops, nice to have a variety like this to show, some with an exposed hammer, some with not, some with a decocker, some with a safety. So things I like about this, it actually looks a little bit more like a SIG. It's a decent size. This is feels like maybe not a full size service pistol, but great for undercover duty, something like that. If you have characters who are doing X-Files kind of stuff, I know they used to use the SIGs. This could work well for that. Decent setup with the sights. I do like that the sights are actually built into the slide on these, as far as I can tell, because I've had a couple of the, I forget if it's the Kemar or the Bruni CZ75s, for example, where the sights ended up going missing when somebody rented them at one point. So, decent attention to detail here. Nice stippling. I like the decocker. There's a little bit of a bigger gap than I'd expect between some of these controls and the frame, but you know, it does the job. It works. It's not bad. Release feels okay. And this is as far as I can tell, this is a decent match. I haven't tried this with a SIG holster. I don't think I have any that are specific to the SIG. I know I have some that fit it, but that doesn't necessarily help if you've got a fitted Kydex holster. So I'll work on editing this together while I'm staying in hotel rooms and in the airport. But I did want to try and get this out because I know this is something new. Those of us who have the SAFD Theatrical firearm certification and are able to teach that, I know it's been hard lately to find hammerless models. For a long time, the Gap, which then disappeared, and the Walther P99S were our only options for hammerless models. And mostly the P99s were available in this top vent version that Umarex does this weird cutout on the slide thing on all their top vent versions. And so it's been hard to get those. They finally, there's a company that just finally got those P99s back in stock, but they're not cheap. They're about 300 some bucks, whereas these Retays are really affordable. So it's an intriguing option to me. Time will tell whether or not they actually hold up and are reliable. Here's another example of that Umarex with a cutout. I really wish we had something that had the trademarks so you could show the close-ups on film like the Umarex does, but didn't have these stupid cutouts for the top vent. For film, there's a lot to be said for being able to get both muzzle flash and the trademarks. They make them elsewhere. These are available in Europe. They're just hard to get in the US. For example, here's one of these Umarex trademarked ones and front vent. But these are really hard to find. So for now, most of us are stuck with the somewhat more limited selection, and I'm glad to have an addition to that possible repertoire. Now once I get back, I'll try and find some time in the theater when I can do some test firing of both the Zorakis and these new Retays. I will certainly share that with you as sort of a part 2, and I hope to be able to compare every of these, especially for those of you who are interested in sort of the options in within front venting Glocks and top venting. But until then, there's a little bit of a start, and these, especially for those of you who are interested in sort of the options in within front venting Glocks and top venting. But until then, there's a little bit of a start, and thank you for watching and for supporting Fight Designer.